Hello, and on behalf of Authority Magazine, it is my pleasure to welcome with me here today, Dr. Sarah Robbins. Hello, Dr. Sarah, how are you doing?
Well, thank you. It's nice to see you.
Yes, same here. Dr. Sarah is a gastroenterologist, that's a mouthful. She is a nutrition specialist and an online educator. And Dr. Sarah and I had the pleasure of connecting via Authority Magazine on the topic of Wellness Reimagined. And I would say we found a lot of things that were in common. And I was like, oh, we have to do, an official video interview so that we can talk even more. And here we are today.
Thank you. I'm hoping I have no computer problems as we go forward.
It's hopefully going to be a smooth sailing from now on. Okay. So you talked about one of the things that there were a lot of things that excited me in that interview, but one of them was that you talked about food as a lifestyle and as nourishment. And I do want to talk more about that because I think sometimes, and I do have to admit guilt to that, is food can be fun and it can be pleasure and it could be satisfying your emotional state, whether it's sadness or happiness or tiredness or whatever else it is. Let's talk about the food as nutrition.
Yeah, well, food is nutrition. I mean, I think that there's that biochemistry of food, and we've kind of reduced food in a lot of ways to micronutrients or vitamins or proteins, the macros, all those kind of things. And we think about it from a functional standpoint, but we don't think about it how it really nourishes us. And I think there's a difference between food as macronutrients and individual components, and food, how it feeds the soul and how we look after each other and ourselves through food and nutrition. And so I like the term nourish because it's more all-encompassing. I think it implies a little bit of kindness and care in how we look after each other. And, if you think about food, it's like there's a birthday cake for a reason. We celebrate through that. We have birthday cake, or, I grew up on a farm and we'd take, if there was a tragedy or emergency or something, you'd make lasagna and take it to people. That's how we look after each other. And I think it's how we need to think about how we look after ourselves.
Yeah. I come from a culture where we do a lot of home cooking, and you're right. People sometimes ask, oh, you eat this, oh, you eat that. We eat everything in moderation, knowing what we can have more of and what we should not have as much of. But we do have fun with food, and on those days when we don't use it as nourishment, I could feel it, right? I could feel that my body doesn't feel as good.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the functions that it plays beyond, I think, just, again, the macronutrients or the individual components, but we forget about the importance of taste or the texture of crunch and how we enjoy food that way. And I really notice it in my patients who can't eat for whatever reason, and how much they miss even just like taste and texture, even when we have other ways of nourishing them. It's such an important component of our entire lives.
And what do you say about food in the context of a lifestyle rather than a 30-day detox or this type of specific eating? Obviously, if you have health conditions, that might be necessary, but for the general public, what is your expert advice or opinion?
Yeah, I think health is a long-term game. It's not a short-term game. And so when we think about how we're using, I think, any modality, not just food, but it's true for exercise, it's true for sleep, it's true for our mental and emotional health. I think the things that you do for a day or two or for a week at a time really don't matter. It's the things that you do day in and day out, the little things that count over the long term, that really add up to making or breaking our health. So I think really we need to view all of our health choices as the long game, not the short game.
Okay, very good. Couple of other words that you use that I really enjoyed is because I preach them on the side of fitness is empowerment and ownership, empowering people to make better choices and allowing people to have ownership for those choices.
Yeah, I think it's a really important part of care and the dialogue that we need to start bringing into into healthcare on a really regular basis. It's really about shared decision making. It's about giving people tools and information to be able to make decisions that make sense for them. Sometimes there's healthcare options that are logical on paper or that are supported by the evidence from a scientific standpoint, but they don't make sense to the individual. They don't fit their lifestyle or their values, or there's something else about that's hard to enact. And so I think if we're really taking an approach of empowering people, giving them education and tools to make decisions that make sense for their individual circumstance, the chances of them being able to be successful with that are so much greater. And it just feels better. I mean, you feel like you've got some control over your health and your life, and that makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Once again, in the interview, you talked about nutrition in the context of women. And I personally work with a lot of middle-aged men and women, and I'm in that category too. We start going through certain changes. Things start changing. And let's split it for the two groups. Like for women, what would be your advice for women who are getting into that premenopause, menopause from a nutritional standpoint? Any practical tips for things to pay attention to, things to be aware of, as bodies are changing, hormone levels are changing, and so forth?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is to be consistent. I was thinking about that this morning. I put on my black shirt, and I always wear black. And I was thinking of Steve Jobs, that example. He always wears a black shirt, and it's sort of like, your routine and your consistency, and it takes a lot of stress and decision making out of things when you're consistent. And so in nutrition, we have a lot of encouragement, I think, to have variety. And while that's important within that context, I think routine and consistency as a base are really important. So figuring out what works for your body and then just do that. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated. There's just so much advice out there. And I think if we just keep it very simple and straightforward, what works for you, and just do it consistently day in and day out. That's my biggest piece of advice.
A personal question that popped into mind. I have read a book which talks about if you eat the same foods consistently, over time your body can start having a response to them, an inflammatory response to them. What do you say to that? If you're, let's say, continuously, if you eat eggs every day, or it could be a healthy food, but if you eat it every day, is there truth to that?
Not that I'm aware of, to be honest with you. I think if you're continuously exposed to foods that are perhaps not as healthy, at some point you're going to have an accumulation of all of those ingredients, and that could be problematic. But I think if our baseline is a variety of food that's generally healthy, I don't think that there's particular concern over or developing like an immunity to that or a problematic response. Inflammation is a word that you use there, and we use it. I see it used very broadly across all kinds of things. I actually don't know if people really know what inflammation means, and I think quite often we use it probably a little bit incorrectly. And then it can
here. Let's talk about that. Tell us what you think versus what you hear in regards to inflammation.
Yeah, I think people use the word inflammation sometimes when they don't feel well, or they feel bloated, for example, or tired or fatigued. But that's not the same as an inflammatory response that's generated by the immune system and propagated by certain, cytokines in different parts of the immune system. Often people don't have inflammation, but they don't feel well. And so it's just one of those terms that gets used around perhaps a little bit inaccurately when people mean different things. And I think how we use our language, it's true for all elements of communication, but it's true for health too. Like if we really provide accurate language around what we're experiencing, it helps your healthcare providers and you, I think, to be able to accurately find solutions. So describing symptoms really accurately is hard to do, but it becomes very important. It's a language thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find it interesting in when I teach people movement, they'll say, oh, that hurts. And I'll say, does it hurt? Like pain hurts? Or is it the muscle is working and it's just uncomfortable because it hurts? And sometimes people are like, I don't know.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
it goes to that awareness that you brought up, to learning to distinguish, am I really, to your point, inflamed, or am I just bloated, or does that food just not sit well with my digestive system?
Yeah. Am I just tired? Is it like I haven't slept well? So learning how to describe how our bodies feel is something I don't think we teach people very well how to do that. And then it becomes an education thing, right, around how we use language to describe symptoms or to understand how our bodies feel.
Yeah, I am very much with you on the education piece, because you're right. Nobody teaches us what does that feel like. Nobody asks us as kids, how does your body feel? Do you feel bloated? It's just you figure it out as you become an adult, maybe.
Maybe. Some of us are still figuring it out.
Yes. So we did talk about advice for women, and I think the advice that you gave in terms of consistency would apply for either gender, right? Regardless of men or women. Do you have anything specific for our gentlemen watching?
Yeah, men are interesting. I think that one of the things I notice a lot with guys is certainly a lot of the men I know are traveling more often, or they're out doing they do business lunches differently. There's like other parts of their lifestyle that I've noticed. And so I find like that eating out part of things for men is really challenging. I don't think that they, depending on the generation, get as much education around food and nutrition and basics of cooking. And so making healthy choices when they're eating out on the road, taking out clients for business dinners, things like that. I see more challenges with guys around that whole part of health and nutrition. And so,
advice to that?
pardon me?
Any advice to that when you're out on the road on a business dinner?
Yeah, I mean, I think that alcohol is a big thing, like limiting alcohol intake. We hear that a lot, but that's really starting to come out in the literature more about, what really is a safe amount of alcohol to be consuming. I think if people generally aim for low sodium, they will get less processed food. They'll get things that have fewer additives. So, I just always say, just ask for low salt. And if we do that when we're eating out, we usually get less of the other stuff and less additives. And it's an easy thing to ask for.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, it's a really easy one. Just ask for low sodium or low seasoning on things, and automatically you get rid of a lot of the additives. And then I always encourage people to, when they're out, ask the restaurant to make modifications, and they almost always will. So, if usually you get like at a meal, protein and a veg and a starch, and you just ask for double the veg and no starch. And right away, you get rid of a lot of calories that way and a lot of the extra fats and additives. So just asking for double veg and low sodium and dressing on the side, and right away that makes a big difference for eating out.
All right, very good. All right, you might laugh at my next question, but you did talk about poop health.
Yeah, yes.
I do think that is important. I mean, sometimes people say, I feel really bloated, and I'll say, did you poop? And sometimes when they don't know me, they're like, what? I'm like, it's a legit question. We all poop.
We all do.
Let's talk about it. So are there standards for healthy pooping? How frequently should you poop? What should your poop look like?
Yeah, it's actually highly variable. And so I think that there is that myth out there that there's a normal, and it's actually a variable part of being a human. And normal for one person is not the same as normal for another. So, people on average will have a bowel motion a day, but some people it's once every couple of days, and for others it's several times a day, 2-3 times a day would be considered within normal. And how poop looks really depends on what you're eating. So it changes a lot. And everybody knows that if they go home and have a lot of cherries, it's really obvious. But everything else that we eat will change how the stool looks. So it's really a function of diet. I always say I'm really worried if there's blood. If you see blood, that's a concern. That color concerns me. Or if their stools are very, very pale, because that can be consistent with some biliary tract, some bile duct disorders. But everything else in between is kind of a function of what we're eating, and it'll change depending on that.
Yeah, and to me, that's a point of awareness that I, for example, teach my daughter. What you put in is what's going to come out. So you have to watch for how is it coming out, because that's your body telling you that felt good, that did not feel so good, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly. And I think around that, speaking to that, fiber is really the big thing that most people are missing, that really will change bowel function. If you're just going to do one like really simple thing, it's related to fiber.
Increase your fiber
consumption. Fiber, yeah.
And let's end with something we spoke prior to recording, and that's prevention versus management of disease.
Yeah, this is so important. When we look at our entire healthcare system, both on an individual level, it's always so much easier to prevent an illness than to deal with one. But it's true for our entire healthcare system. I think if we're looking at prevention, our healthcare costs, which are increasing all of the time, are really going to be minimized if we take a preventative approach. So it's good for individuals, and it's also good for society to really start to think about how we can utilize nutrition and lifestyle changes early on, early interventions, to really mitigate a lot of chronic disease. I mean, it's a huge function when we look at cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancers. Those big categories of illness are largely mitigated by diet and exercise changes.
Yeah. Sometimes they're a lot easier than they appear to be. Right, a lot of things could be prevented a lot easier than managing.
They absolutely could, and the intervention, it sounds big, but it doesn't have to be. Small active living, small diet changes over time really accumulated. It kind of goes back to the long game of health, and really thinking, those small daily steps are very additive over the course of our lives.
Okay. Dr. Sarah, do you have any exciting projects you're working on you want to share with us?
Well, I'm excited about the gut health courses that I'm still working on and are coming out. I'm going to do several that are disease-based for inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, for example. And then I've got one coming out on gut health for people who are well and who want to maintain that, incorporate it as part of their overall preventative and education wellness routine.
Okay. And if people would like to find more information on that, where can they find information?
Yeah, my website at wellsunday.com will have all of the information and registration.
Okay, and it's WellSunday, WELLSUNDAY, right?
Yes, yeah, like taking one day a week to be well and healthy.
Yes, and then make it habit. Yeah. You said make it consistency, so there we go.
Exactly, yeah. Take the time to plan.
Yes. Dr. Sarah, this has been a true pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Wish you continued success and look forward to doing more stuff together.
Thank you. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you too.